my neighborhood is that we do bear the brunt of a lot of the affordable housing issues on the west side, and we'd love to see that spread a little bit further onto the east side, I think. So that's my comment right there.
Thank you very much. Thanks for taking the time to join us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to comment to the board? All right, then we'll move to item A2, which is further comments on budget amendment number 1 for this fiscal year. The other was general, and it didn't really matter that it was in there. Is there anyone who wants to comment on that? If not, then I will look for a motion to close the public hearing. There's a motion by Board Member Luke and a second by Board Member Rogers. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Good job, Aaron. The motion passes. It's kind of eerie, isn't it? We can hear you. We now move to item B1, the approval of minutes from Tuesday, October 10th to 2017. Is there a motion for that? Any corrections or additions to the minutes? Okay. Second? Anyone?
Second.
There is a motion by Board Member Rogers to approve the minutes and a second by Board Member Johnston. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. We move to item B2, the resolution for budget amendment number 1 for fiscal year 2017-18 for 1500 West North Temple Street. And I'd like to invite Danny Walls to join us at the table, and Tammy Hunsaker, both from the RDA. Danny's the COO, and Jennifer Bruno from council staff, and Ben Lutke also. And we've got Melissa Jensen. Do you want to come be on the end? Did I see Melissa come in? Oh, there she is. Okay. That chair's just way lower. Thank you so much for being with us. And she's with hand. So, Danny, can I have you tee this up for us, and then we'll go forward. Thank you.
First off, thank you very much, everyone, for being here today and calling this special meeting. As we go through this item, and you've seen in the coverage that this is a very important item, and we certainly appreciate everyone taking the time to have an additional meeting this month. We're here today to talk to you about what is structured to be a loan request from the Redevelopment Agency for the purpose of acquiring property on North Temple. That would also anticipate a budget amendment in order to allocate those funds. Understanding that this is coming ahead of the larger discussion of the RDA's housing funding strategy, we recognize that, and our hope is to provide you with the information from staff so that we can address all the concerns and questions that the board has had and that have come up as part of the discussions. Clearly, it was provided that the opportunity would be available to the RDA in order to look at projects in advance of the larger RDA housing funding strategy. That was anticipated at the time, and that's not to discount the importance of the funding strategy as much as to recognize the timing of this project such that it was an opportunity that presented itself that we wanted to be able to take advantage of. We certainly wanted to put it before you in front of the board as we have identified it as an opportunity that is worth pursuing. Recognizing that the timing of it was not ideal, I hope as we provide the information, you will recognize that that has become a function of the negotiations with the property owner and putting the project together, and the efforts of HAND and the Blue Ribbon Commission to figure out this project. And as part of that, they were exploring other options of ways to structure this deal and reach out to partners in a way that potentially would not necessarily involve the city or the RDA, but unfortunately the timing was such that we weren't able to do that. And so we wanted to make sure that we preserved the option and the opportunity to come before you and see if the board shared our view that this is a priority project and one that we wanted to pursue. So there's been a lot of conversation and discussions as housing has come up, both in our own meetings with the RDA as well as the City Council with regard to the city's housing plan. There's been a lot of questions in terms of either who's in charge or what the various roles are of everyone involved in this. And one of the ways I like to think of how we got to where we are is if you imagine a Venn diagram, and between HAND and the RDA and the Blue Ribbon Commission, each being their own circle, the role and goals of HAND would be to guide the housing policy and strategy for the city overall. That is what you, serving as a council, are doing. That is what you're looking at in the GROW SLC plan. And that would basically be what the city's priorities are, objectives, and vision for how they would like to not only address housing in general, but also the crisis for affordable housing and the needs. The RDA, as you know, is the board. We are charged with carrying out the goals and objectives of the city's master plans, and obviously the housing plan would be one which we do. And we are charged with doing that within the areas of project areas with the intention of growing the property tax base and using that tax increment to improve that area. Obviously, we have the ability to spend housing funds throughout the city, but primarily our focus and priority needs to be spending funds on projects that develop tax increment and provide us that funding mechanism to continue to improve areas of the city. The Blue Ribbon Commission is a commission formed by the administration, and they've been tasked with a number of things to look at in terms of addressing the housing needs, as well as finding solutions and funding strategies for ways that we can do that. And they have also started taking on the task of doing that within the goal of providing housing at 40% AMI or less, and taking on the challenge of trying to provide units to help offset the need as the homeless shelter closes. So if you think of these three circles, what we're here to talk to you about today is basically where those three circles coincide, and that's the overlapping in that Venn diagram. This is a partnership, this is a project where the goals and objectives of all three groups have come together, and we can accomplish a lot of things with one project and by funding this. Now, as we get into it, you're going to see that the details are not necessarily all there, and that's okay. That's provided for within the structure of providing an acquisition loan, and we feel that we have set up the structure and the contingencies by which we can come back and address those issues that would satisfy the board, while also leaving open the opportunity to go and address them within the housing funding strategy on that larger context. So I'm going to turn the time over to Tammy, and she will talk you through the terms of the loan and the structure as it relates to what the RDA's program is, how we've set it up, and how that relates to within other projects we've done. Then we'll turn it over to Melissa, who can give you the background and the role of both HAND and the BRC in terms of bringing this project together and before you today. And then ultimately we can invite up the applicant from Utah Nonprofit, and they can talk to you about the details and what their vision is for how to move this project forward and what ultimately they would like to bring back to you. So unless there are any questions for me on that, I'd like to turn the time over to Tam.
Madam Chair.
Yes, before you say that, also, I just want to clarify, you sent us a draft copy of the proposed housing plan for that, and we'll be going into detail. We just got a preview of that, but I think there's been some confusion that today we'd be discussing in depth all 5 of the proposals, where today this was only for this specific project on North Temple. So I just want to clarify that for anybody who's wanting to understand and hear about it. Okay, Stan, go ahead.
Danny, thanks for that summary and update. Prior to your arrival on the RDA, there were a lot of conversations in the formation of the North Temple district, in particular around the idea or the concept of a catalytic project that we might consider in order to sort of kick off, initiate, infuse investment in the corridor. And I'm just wondering if you're familiar with that concept as we talked about it, and I understand you might not be because it was before you got to us. But if there was any consideration of a location like this on a primary transit corridor as a potentially catalytic project in that entire North Temple area.
Yeah, I am familiar with it. I've been involved in discussions on that, and if you're asking me my opinion of whether I view this as a catalytic project or if it was identified as something else.
Well, I guess it's a twofold question. At one point, we had some conversations about being a little more deliberate as a board and as an agency about identifying and finding catalytic projects as we establish new areas. And I don't know that we landed on something in North Temple, and so I don't want to put you on the spot to say this is the catalytic project, but I'm just wondering if there was some consideration in your discussions around this project that it could be, might be, are there opportunities there for that sort of catalyst?
The short answer would be yes. I would probably consider this a catalytic project, because I think anytime you have a project with an investment of this scale, I think that is something that can help put a shot in the arm of any area. And new development, new residents, people coming in and supporting the businesses there. I very much would see this as a project that could start that ball rolling. Is it the only one? No, I don't think so. I don't think this would serve us any good if we looked at this as the one and only project that that area would need. I see this as a good start. I see this as something that you can build upon. And then I see this as adding on to any other opportunities we're currently looking at in the area, which is you just need to build off that momentum.
And Dan, this is probably a conversation for a future meeting, so I'm truly not trying to trick you here. But when we initially had some of those conversations, I think the concept was as we develop an RDA area, that it would be advisable for us to consider a individual or a group of projects right at the very beginning that we could invest in early, either through RDA funds or even some other city funds that would be like a kickoff point for investment in the community, so that if we took the lead and it was part of this shifting out of this model of drawing an RDA boundary and just sitting back and waiting for the tax increment to start rolling in versus some sort of initial investment that could initiate that tax increment starting to come in sooner. We find ourselves too often in an RDA district at the end of the district without all the money we hoped we'd get for the projects we wanted to do. So I just want to put that context around it, and maybe if you would park that for a future conversation, that'd be helpful. Thanks.
Okay, Tammy.
Great, thank
Thanks.
you. Just briefly, I will review the terms of the loan. The RDA worked really closely with HAND to develop these terms, and they have been reviewed by the RDA Finance Committee. So as I think you all know, the loan request is for $4 million. That's the asking purchase price of the property. We'd be structuring this as a 2-year short-term affordable housing land acquisition loan, which is allowed through the RDA loan policy. We came up with an interest rate of 3.51%, so that's looking at the RDA loan policy, the base interest rate of the current U.S. Treasury yield for the 2-year term.
Can
And
I
then-
interrupt you right there?
Sure.
Did we get an appraisal on this property?
We did it appraised for $4.1 million,
Okay, thank you.
and that's as is, assuming that it's vacant land. So not as is, but assuming that it's
Okay,
vacant
so
land.
that does not cost.
Yes.
That's
Include
not,
the tear down
Demolition
cost.
is not included
Okay.
in that number.
but the appraisal was not considering existing structures. It was land only.
I believe so, yes.
Could we clarify
Anne
that?
can correct me if I'm wrong. Melissa,
That's right.
it is.
Sorry, that's correct. I know Erin's on the phone, so I want to make sure she can hear me.
So
I can hear you.
it did appraise
Thank
for
you.
higher, but it did not. Typically, when the RDA provides or acts as the primary financer, we require a 90% loan to value. If we're providing gap financing, we go up to 95. So we're a little bit short of meeting that standard in this instance. So the base interest rate's 4.51%, and then in the RDA loan program, we have the ability to provide interest rate reductions for certain public benefits. So there's a 0.5 percentage point off for affordable housing and a half off for economic impact. We define economic impact as the redevelopment of a vacant or blighted property, so we felt that this fit that category. The loan terms propose no payments during the term of the loan, but interest is accruing. Disbursement, the funds would be disbursed upon loan closing. We would record a restrictive use covenant to require development of affordable housing on the property, since this is a short-term land acquisition loan for affordable housing. We would also record a first trust deed for the property, which puts us in a secure place with securing the loan. And it did appraise for more than the acquisition cost. We are requesting or recommending some contingencies. First of all, I think it was discussed that the purchase contract is currently in the name of the Housing Assistant Management Enterprise, which is an entity of the Housing Authority. So we would require that the purchase contract indeed be transferred to the applicant before loan closing. Just for transparency, we do have a contingency that's recommended for loan and accrued interest forgiveness. It's unknown at this time what the final capital stack will be in the project pro forma and what the project concept is, but just to be transparent, the applicant could come back to request some sort of level of loan forgiveness in the future. And then another contingency we're recommending is project noticing, because there are so many unknowns at this time. We're requiring the applicant on a quarterly basis provide an update on development concepts, intent to apply for financing, whether it's affordable housing or traditional financing, and then notices of award of any financing, whether it's low-income housing tax credits, Olene Walker, or traditional financing. We did take this loan request to the RDA Finance Committee, which is made up of administrative staff and then some members of our Redevelopment Advisory Committee. The committee did recommend approval by a majority vote. However, there were some concerns on the project just with some of the unknowns currently, and the committee recommended 2 additional contingencies. One, that project milestone requirements, they wanted to build in some benchmarks, so within 6 months of receipt of the funds, the applicant would need to provide the RDA with a final project concept, and then within 1 year, provide the RDA with the final financing capital stack. The second contingency that the Finance Committee recommended was that the terms were a little vague before, but they wanted a minimum of a 50-year affordability period recorded on that deed restriction on the property. So those are the 2 recommendations, and the Finance Committee felt that those really kind of alleviated some of the current concerns they had with the preliminary nature of this loan request and the project.
Can I ask you to go through what the concerns were that the
Sure.
loan committee had?
The 90% loan to value standard, which we discussed a little bit ago, just the fact that the project, depending on the final affordability level, it's anticipated that a considerable amount of subsidy will need to go into the project, and the sources of that is currently unknown. The Blue Urban Commission does anticipate raising some philanthropic funds for the project, but those details still need to be worked out. Tying up $4 million of RDA funding with no clear exit strategy. We do have somewhat of an idea of what the strategy is, and the loan would be a 24-month term, but there still are some unknowns around that. Details of the project are currently unknown, including the affordability mix, the total project cost. Even though the RDA will have a first trust deed on the property, value is not guaranteed. So currently it appraised for $4.1 million, but will that value hold over the lifetime of the term of the loan? The applicant's financials, at the time that the loan committee met, information was still coming in. However, since then, Hand and the RDA have reviewed the applicant's financials, and they do indicate an ability to repay the loan. And then a final concern was
Yes.
But the loan review committee has not looked at it after all the documents have come in?
the loan committee did not look at all the financials, no.
Okay.
And a final point was the applicant does not have skin in the game at this point in time.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, yes.
So, a little piece of that sort of blew by that I caught in the sake of transparency. I don't know that I've ever experienced a provision for an opportunity for an application for loan forgiveness when it wasn't used. So, is the provision for full forgiveness of the $4 million within that 2-year period?
What would happen is, in order to forgive a portion of the loan or become a participant in the larger capital stack, that would have to come back to the board for approval. So the way it's structured right now is that it's a 2-year loan with interest, and they pay it off after 2 years, and the interest accrues, but there's no payments required. Anything different from that would have to come back to the board for approval.
So here's my concern, Danny. We're approving that today. The first step in that road is generally the most difficult step, and it becomes really difficult to deny that application if it becomes part of the financial stack later on. So
And you
I
can
just want to be
certainly-
really
yeah.
aware of that we are suggesting today that they could at some point apply for full forgiveness of the entire amount of this loan.
Right. You have that ability as a board, regardless of whether we state that as a contingency or not. With any loan, you have the ability to waive or amend any parameter within the loan. And so certainly if you are not comfortable with stating that contingency today, that would not preclude you from still having that opportunity in the future.
I guess, is it unusual to state it up front like this? Because I know we've looked at loans in the past where we've come back after the fact and considered it. Is this an unusual thing to include it right up front?
I don't think so. Our intention in including it up front was to help provide you, the board, with comfort that if at any time they wish you to be a participant, that's when they're going to have to come back with the details of the project, what the project is, what the affordability mix is. So it's not so much that you're waiving a right or that you're precluding that that's going to happen, as much as that's our way of providing the security that nothing is set in stone until you approve those details, and you would have that opportunity to have it come back to you. So that's the reason we put it up front, was to give you the comfort that you weren't signing off on the project as much as any participation that the agency has includes the ability to approve the project. So,
Derek?
Thanks for being here and for bringing this important issue forward. Lisa, you already asked my question about the fair market value of the property, so I'd like to make a friendly request that you forward the appraisal to the board so that we could take a look at that ourselves. A couple concerns that I share with the finance committee are focused primarily on the unknowns. We don't know how many units. We have no idea what the affordability mix is. And you heard from a community member today about affordability on the west side. I think we really need to, oh, by the way, we also don't have a final cost yet. I mean, these are some pretty big unanswered questions that I think it kind of feels like we're moving at this backwards. You know, we have an applicant for a loan with all of these unanswered questions, when really we should, as a city, if this is a city-run project, it seems to me anyway that maybe we should be the ones driving the redevelopment, focused on, you know, X amount of units with, you know, a 60-40 split on affordability, under 40% AMI, or whatever the requirements are. And so I guess I want to see this redevelop. I think the developer at hand is great and has a great history in Salt Lake City, doing some really cool things, in particular in the Central 9th neighborhood. I think that there's a lot of opportunity with this developer. It just feels a little bit backwards to me. And so to Melissa, I know that you are heavily involved, kind of leading out with the Blue Ribbon Commission. So can you just talk to me about how and why this project floated to the top as one of the 5, and what the Blue Ribbon Commission was thinking with this?
Sure. Thank you for the question. Let me first start by saying, in terms of an acquisition loan, in the development community, it's quite common to not have all of your sort of eggs in your basket in terms of what the end product is. And so I think that there's a couple of things going on there. One is we're really presenting a unique partnership opportunity, and I think that that's different than the way that we traditionally do from the Housing Trust Fund perspective. If we think about that, we always come in at the end. The deal is fully baked. We know exactly where we land. Where this is really front end, but perhaps that's the way that we can be most responsive to some of the needs. And so with that in mind, and the applicants will speak to this, what we've come at it from is a partnership. And that's where the Blue Ribbon Commission comes in, because I think what's critical about this piece is it's a very strong commitment from this board to our community in terms of redeveloping, and what the applicant and the Blue Ribbon Commission are bringing in terms of their partnership is a commitment from the private sector to help develop and build this thing at a lower cost, and they're here as well, so they can speak to that. I won't speak to it for them, but in a conversation yesterday with Clark Ivory, he was very clear that they are here to help, to respond, and to work with this applicant to make this project happen in a way that is cost efficient and leverages both private and public dollars. And so in that way, it's more unique. And part of that partnership is having continuing conversations about unit mix. What unit mix will depend greatly on is how the financing is structured, right? And so it really, they go hand in hand as we think about that. In preempt to this meeting, I have met with both the vice chair of the Glendale Community Council and also the chair of the Fair Park Council to talk about mix specifically. And in conversations that we've had, I certainly, HAND does not underestimate the issue for this community. We've talked about it regularly over the last 2 years, and we take it very seriously. So in talking with the community on this issue, I said, can we start at a 60% affordable, 40% market rate mix as a starting point, not a solid, not an absolute, and then we can work together with them being the spokespeople for their community to bring them into this unique process. The advantage that we have actually at this time is that normally by the time a housing trust fund loan comes here, everything's done. And so there isn't any flexibility on the mix. And in this case, we actually can bring some folks in and help to make sure that multiple goals are met. Just one more answer to your question, and that is why this project over others. And that really speaks to what Danny was getting at, is we felt that it met multiple objectives in terms of blight and the ability to replace it with something that we think can be catalytic, especially for the adjacent properties. So we've also been in conversations with the applicant that owns adjacent properties, who's a market rate developer, who's very committed to working at this in tandem as a collaborative piece. And then you would really look at a whole development acreage of about 6 acres on that.
Thank you, Melissa. To Danny, when we think about this as a potential catalytic project, one of a couple potentially, as you mentioned, an important point to me as a board member of the redevelopment agency is to see this become more than just housing. You know, I want to see a mix of uses. And to me, I acknowledge that we don't have an exact definition of what catalytic is, but I would argue that we need to see a healthy mix of the uses as well as a healthy mix in the affordability rates. So as we're looking at these unanswered questions, I think that there's a couple out there that we really need to get some answers to at some point here. And I don't know if it comes before we approve this loan or after, but just as a dialogue piece for the board here, I think that those are some pretty important questions for us, especially if we're looking at a forgivable $4 million loan.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I think those are concerns and questions that if the board has, obviously the applicants here, they're hearing them. They will know that as part of coming back to the board, that they will either need to incorporate those within the development or be able to come and speak to those at that time of what they can or cannot do as part of the larger project. And so, and as you mentioned, that question of mix of uses is not always just on a parcel by parcel individual basis, but absolutely what you said of the area as a whole. And if you look at this project as being one of those developments, and if this spurs development right on the adjacent properties, and maybe that's market rate housing, and then we can also use that momentum to do something with commercial and other uses, that's where you can really start getting that mix of uses. And to the extent you can also incorporate those within the individual projects, then that's great, and we can certainly work with them and explore those options as we're moving this project forward.
I have a question. We don't have a pro forma yet for this project, and we also don't have a development budget to look at. Do we know when we can anticipate seeing that?
The applicant can help answer that question, but I would like to note that the RDA loan program, short-term land acquisition for affordable housing, was built into the program. That's affordable housing is the only reason we would do land acquisition, and it's very common for these projects not to have all the details known at that time, like the project pro forma, development cost, other items. We do know that applicant's been running some preliminary pro formas, so
I think as part of the milestones that Tammy indicated too, you would have both the quarterly reporting and then the 6-month milestones by which they would have to come back with design, and then the 1 year for the financing. And obviously we would hope to start seeing those pro formas in advance of that 1 year, because that deadline would be to have their financing in place. And so I think to the extent that they have those pro formas, that at a point where they can share them, we would have that come to you as part of that reporting structure.
Erin, do you have questions?
Yes, I do. And they aren't in any particular order, so I'll just start working through it. But I share the Finance Committee concerns. I share the concern that I think I've heard some of you, my peers, talk about, that I would articulate as a real lack of clarity on the fulfillment of our policy as it relates to affordable housing, that has been quite clear regarding quality of life for the community in the area, for the product itself, the quality of the product, the integration with the neighborhoods, and even through development, the integration plan in bringing such a significant product to an area that we certainly want this kind of redevelopment to happen, but there's a real lack of clarity around the planning to accomplish this in a way that this body, I think, would see as successful. And this discussion around the need to do this quickly rather than being presented with a product that, or a proposal that is clearly aligned with our policy goals. And I would say it isn't by saying that we have a great amount of ambiguity around the number of units, around what majority affordable housing means, and that majority designation being in contrast, in my opinion, to this body's appetite to have a majority of affordable in new developments in this area. That's something that we haven't been warm to in the past, and so I'm still reluctant about that. Not just the ambiguity of majority, whether that's 51% or 99%, we don't know.
Is there a question in there?
How are we not going to RFP for this?
We're not doing an RFP because this is not city-owned property. This is a private developer, nonprofit, coming in and asking for a loan to purchase the property from the RDA.
The RDA doesn't own it, so how can they purchase it from us?
Sorry, they would use the RDA loan to purchase the property from the current owners. So we do not have the control over the ultimate disposition of the property.
Even though it's essentially a city entity that has the option on the property.
Jennifer,
Madam Chair, if
Bruno?
I could just
Yes.
pipe in. I think one of the contingencies that the RDA staff has proposed would address that, which would be the contingency that the loan be contingent upon the housing authority assigning the purchase contract to Western Regional Nonprofit. To your question on the RFP process, though, Board Member Mendenhall, the Attorney's Office has said that because this is maybe a case where we have a new program in the $21 million set aside for affordable housing that the board didn't contemplate necessarily setting up its own process for. But the board could absolutely set up a process where you would essentially have an RFP process for private developers to apply for loans. It just so happens that there is no governing process that governs loan applications at this point. But if the board was interested in creating that as a process to guide future requests for loans, then the board could certainly discuss that. So,
I guess the path that seems like the most sure way for us to ensure that what majority means actually meets the policy and the values that the board and the council have established, and that the process of development and all of these other pieces that are really ambiguous at this point, it seems like we would be in a better position if we went to RFP and we had clarity from respondents around how they're going to fulfill, how they're going to execute, and exactly what the project looks like. And I don't mean that I know that we've issued loans before when there is some ambiguity about design, that some of those details are yet to be worked out, that the community process is far from beginning, but that they have a plan. We don't even know if we're talking about actually funding the projects happening. And I mean the projects in terms of 99% affordability, 90% affordability. That's the kind of mix that I've never seen this board be warm to. So for us to approve this money today without knowing if we're approving the projects gives me a great deal of unrest.
Anything else, Aaron? Or Melissa, did you want to?
Yeah, I have one more.
Okay, Melissa wanted to respond to that.
I think I just want to shed some light on the process here. And I think it's a great point. And HAND has been very successful in our RFP process with city-owned properties. And so we certainly recognize that as a very critical and valuable process. I think what is different about this project is we're really relying on the private sector to give us the bang for the buck. The way that this loan is structured now, there's full repayment in there. We're looking for a commitment to our community that says, we are with you. We need your help to develop this site. And getting people on board, there's a significant amount of risk from the developer standpoint as well in taking over this motel as early as it is. And so I don't want to minimize what the ask is. $4 million is a lot of money. I certainly understand that, and we want to make sure it's good use. What I think that you will hear from the applicant, and they will say it better than myself, is that they are really committed to making sure that this is a product that this board is proud of, and that they are going to go above and beyond to make it something that leverages your dollars. And lastly, I would just add, if this board feels that there is a certain threshold that they do not want to see the project go over in terms of mix, I'm sure the applicants would be very amenable to that. What we know value-wise is that we are committed to mixed income. So we have, majority for us is not 99%, absolutely not, but we would welcome direction from the board on that.
Melissa, we've heard already though about the difficulty in developing along a transit corridor and the lack of skin in the game by this developer in terms of brand new construction. Can you speak to that? What kind of assurances do we have?
I'll speak to the first part. Melissa can get into the difficulty or the issues with developing housing on a transit corridor. The assurances we have essentially is that, as we've indicated, the loan is structured with the premise that it has a repayment. Interest is going to accrue. If the applicant chooses to have the RDA participate in the capital stack, then they are going to have to come back to you with the project details and the request, and that will be the basis by which this board can decide if their threshold for the percentage of affordability meets the goals and objectives. As Melissa indicated, to the extent that you wish to put a range or a threshold on that today, I think we would be happy to have that conversation and get that direction. I don't think anyone's opposed to stating what the concerns are or putting upward limits or minimums on that. And so if there's a threshold by which you'd like to do that, then certainly we can have that discussion today, or we can bring that back to you as part of what the ultimate project details are. But the idea is understanding that this is an acquisition, and we are providing the opportunity for this developer who has a proven track record to do these projects, that you're putting a little bit of trust into the relationship between the city and this developer to come forth with the project that we all want to be supportive and have be a good project, and that there is an element of risk, and that the city is being asked by the private developers to show that they have a little bit of skin in this game. If we're going to talk about solving the affordable housing crisis, and if we're going to talk about the city and the plans and the goals and how to spend RDA money, then at some point we also have to put our skin in the game, and we have to show the developers that we're willing to be a partner. And they have indicated to us that when the city can do that, which we believe we've set that opportunity, then that's when they're going to be able to step up and come together and put these projects together. So I don't
And Danny,
say that.
why don't we buy this property with that same amount of money and have less risk in the game for those taxpayer dollars that we have set aside for this purpose, and still get the project, but get it with more assurance, because it's not under the gun of needing to purchase right now. We've already locked it up. And for the fact that we could even go to RFP and have more clarity around the product that we're
That is a
proposing.
great question. And the reason for that is because we are putting faith in the private development. We are
Why?
trying to meet the goal and the objective of leveraging our funds. And so we are providing the funds to a developer who has indicated that they're willing to step up and be the developer and build it and own and operate it, and that the assurance that we are trying to get is that they are then going to leverage those funds and put the larger capital stack together.
Madam
So-
Chair.
Well, we could do the same with a land write-down, so.
Madam Chair.
Aaron, Stan has a follow-up.
And I'm sorry, Aaron, I don't mean to interrupt, but this conversation is, and I'm have growing angst because the language is sounding so familiar to the language we heard 8 years ago around a project that has now failed on State Street. And this idea of just trusting that it's going to work out okay, and the developer has good intentions, which I don't doubt, doesn't give me a lot of comfort that we're going to get what we want and then it's going to be a good project. And so, and maybe I am being a little nervous about this, having just gone through a foreclosure and having to figure out how to acquire some property, because those promises were very similar to the promises we heard then. We were enticed by a good project. It had a lot of good things going for it, a lot of assurances from the developer. We wanted it to work desperately. We provided extensions in that situation when things were not working out financially, and ultimately it failed, and we were faced with letting it go or trying to acquire the property to assure some affordability on that site. And this is sounding really similar, and I feel like I feel like I need to share that there is some rationale for this concern around the language we're using about trust when we don't have all of the details that might allow us to get to that place of trust. And frankly, there's a lot of vagueness in this proposal, and there are a lot of uncertain things. And I know that we have the opportunity to visit this in the future and say no, but I don't know that alleviates my concerns that we're taking a pretty risky position. I'm also very concerned when I hear this language about how the city doesn't have any skin in the game, and I have a pretty strong reaction to that when we've set aside $21 million and we've been looking for recommendations on how to allocate that, and then you come back and say, well, you need to do this, otherwise you don't have any skin in the game. It's like, hold it.
Matt,
That is a really inappropriate accusation to this board. It feels like an accusation to this board, and we've been waiting for a recommendation from the administration for over a year now. So don't come here in this minute at a last-minute meeting that you asked us to schedule because deadlines were up and say, oh, you have to act now because we've been waiting for you and you don't have any skin in the game. That is a complete misportrayal of this whole situation, and it doesn't help your case.
No, and let me clarify that, because that's not how it was meant. It was not an accusation as much as that is what the private developers have very much indicated to us, is they are willing to come in and participate in the projects. They are willing to come in and be partners with the construction and the development and provide the donations. But at the same time, they have asked that the city also come forward and put the money and the resources available. And that money and resources is exactly what you've indicated, is the $21 million, and finding ways to put that out there as seed money for these projects. So that wasn't meant to be an accusation, and it certainly is not.
I'm sorry, Danny.
intended to be.
I've just heard it from.
I understand.
You were sort of the last straw of the person I heard it
and
from.
As far as the concerns about State Street and other projects, those are extremely valid, and we are extremely sensitive to that as the RDA. As we put properties out there, and we have to go out there and do these projects, and every development has a certain element of risk. There's no denying that, and obviously, as we come forward with a project that has the details that it does and the vagueness that we have to address those. And we feel that we have done that insofar as we are providing a loan with the opportunity for the developer to put the project together. We have a first trust deed position on the property, and so our protection is to the extent that the developer does not perform and does not pay that loan back within the term of the loan, we have the property. Okay, so that's our first assurance. The second assurance is beyond that investment in the property, you don't have to agree to do anything until you are at that comfort level,
So,
that project. And so we recognize the fact that those details aren't here, but that is the idea of an acquisition loan and providing that partnership with both HAND and the Blue Ribbon Commission to try to put that project together. So
thank you, Danny. I don't want to feel like I cut Erin off because that was kind of a follow-up to some questions
Okay.
that she is, I mean,
Aaron, you can't see. Jennifer Bruno wants to.
Just a minor
Clarify
procedural,
something.
like a procedural clarification, because since the format of the board has been more clarified in terms of legislative role, administrative role, once the funding has been authorized by the board, there really isn't the opportunity to take that funding back. I think the question that is up for the board in the future is loan forgiveness. So once you release the money is gone. I think the question in the future will be, is the money kept as a loan, or is the money kept as a loan and repaid back, or is the loan forgiven? So just to clarify.
yeah, no, we didn't mean you could
Sorry,
take the funds back as much.
Charlie, you have a question?
Yeah, well, actually, Madam Chair, I have quite a few things that I want to bring up, but
Okay. And Andrew,
I know that
after you.
Andrew has some questions before we hear from the applicant, and I would like to save mine until after the applicant has a chance to comment.
Okay.
Charlie, can I, because Dan did kind of cut me off, can I just say my parting remark here? That back to Danny, you said that this is about us having faith in the market. The lack of affordable housing, and the lack of these projects happening that has sent us into a crisis mode has nothing to do with the city not having faith. We put aside more money than any city in the Intermountain West has put aside for affordable housing. We have incredible faith that we're going to move mountains. The reality is we're not going to move 1,000 units before June of 2019. And this false rush, truly, it's a false rush. We've even heard it from the Blue Ribbon Commission, private experts, those people on the Blue Ribbon Commission. There's no way that's happening. And so to the premise that we're even in this emergency meeting about today, that we have an urgency, really needs to take a back seat to good policy and good affordable housing development. And this project can still happen. But I think the way we're going about it is not transparent. And I'm glad that we're having this robust discussion. So I'll hand it to Charlie.
Actually, you're going to hand it to Andrew.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm thankful for private development coming in. I think it's a great thing for us. I think we do need to team up that way. I'm grateful for somebody being interested in developing this piece of property. Melissa, I heard what you said about meeting with the neighbors and saying this is a starting point, talking about 60-40 or whatever. We're going to start with 60% affordable, 40% market rate, and then working from there. I've also, I think I saw that the State Street development, which is about half the size of this, give or take, is already slated to be less than 50% affordable. Is that accurate? 40%-ish?
The State Street one that we just purchased,
Yeah.
we are working out what that percentage would be right now. We have not settled on a percentage.
Or are you referring to the Capitol Motel?
The Capitol Motel.
Okay, that's a different, the one in the
Yeah.
funding strategy. So I don't know if there's details on that yet.
Because there was in there. I think
There
the statement was made that it was 40% was the target right now, whereas the North Temple project would be targeted above 50%. Is that accurate?
It would be targeted above 50% affordable.
Mm-hmm.
You're referring
Talking
to the
AMI or percentage of units?
Total units.
Total
overall.
units. So right now, the overnighter place was targeted at somewhere above 51% affordability in there. As far as number of units, 51% plus would be affordable, depending on the mix.
I would say as it developed, yes. But since these are all preliminary, right, we're just working on acquisition, that is up for discussion.
Go ahead.
Well, I think what you're referring to is the funding strategy, and those were estimates that were created over a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
And for the overnighter and the capital, we were being conservative and put less than 50% affordable. But that was before this funding request came in and the project started to evolve.
my question is, it feels again, and this is a feeling, based on what I've seen so far, the feeling is that we're okay going above 50% in number of units affordable in this area, but we're not somewhere else. And I'm not talking about the other full projects that are going to be permanent supportive housing, or the Barnes Bank project where we're identified as this. This is sort of, there's two motels we're looking at, one on State Street, one on North Temple, and very different expectations up front. And I know we can talk about this going forward, but the underlying premise is that private development coming into North Temple is more than willing to do a majority affordable in there, but they're not somewhere else in the city. And unless we do something about that as a city, and that's not going to change. Can you help me understand this a little bit then?
I don't think that's the premise at all, Board Member Johnston. One of the reasons we're not talking about Capital Motel today is because we are still doing a lot of work on that. Currently, we haven't really approached our private partners about developing that, so they don't have a say in the affordability mix. So I think that probably if the numbers came out that way, it certainly wasn't intentional in that. And then also just reminding the board that we have about 4 permanent supportive housing projects that are all coming online over the next 2 years. And I think only one of them will be west of I-15. So the rest of them are going to be east side, including the Magnolia, which is on 30 East.
Yeah, so my concern is not this intention. I don't think anybody intends. But if we look at 15th West, Peter Caroon's group just bought the property across Cornell Street from it for affordable housing. That's going to be majority affordable as well. And we're not intending to put more of this together. But because of market conditions and other things, it happens. Unless we're very aware and clear about this, try not to. And so that's my concern, is that we can easily move down this path of saying we do need private development. I agree with that. We do need this area helped. I agree with that. And unintentionally, we end up having a denser amount of this in one area. And I understand what you're saying about the other permanent supportive housing, but we're targeting those in very specific places. Help me understand that then. How do we intervene to make sure we don't have this unintentional consequence?
So this is such a challenge, and for me it goes into what is within our authority, and I don't mean the administration or this, I mean literally for this board, and it's a perfect example of all of those deals came in late, right? They already had all the financing, they bought the land, we had nothing to do with any of that because that is the way that Utah Housing Corporation has set up their tax credit process. So from that perspective, we have very little ability. If we mirror it to this project, it's coming in first. You don't have all the details. You don't have everything lined up, but you do have some say in affordability mix. So it's sort of like, at which points do we have decisions on where building is made, and then looking at those decision points for where the policy can be created? Because I don't know what to, because I hear you and I hear the community and I talk with them regularly. And so beyond that, and we had this conversation while we were talking about this project about how to be more proactive going forward. How instead of responding when the deal is in front of you from a housing trust fund loan, how do we really be proactive about engaging private development and other housing to get into the community, as opposed to just opposing things as they come in late in the game? And I know that that's not a very good answer, Board Member Johnston, but it is such a complicated issue. And so it's really, what do we have control over, what we don't? And in this project, we are asking for participation as we go through the deal, which is slightly different. And the timing of it is not just the sort of date of the road home closure. I don't know whether that's going to happen. I can't speak to that. But what I can say is that the seller of this property has also not been especially flexible. Had we been able to get an extension to move this out, we would have. The developer that owns the adjacent properties, the private developer, had tried to purchase this property several times and was never successful. And so that's also an issue as we think about who is going to develop the property going forward. I know that was a lot.
Well,
Can I just pause for just 1 second? Aaron, you are sounding like we're listening to a 33 1/3 RPM record with a scratch in it. Probably most people
sorry.
aren't old enough to remember that. I'm just wondering if anyone who's good at this can tell us, do we have her call us back, or what do we do? Because it's
I'm just sitting still in a room.
it sounds
So-
like you're hammering outside the building, and it may be that too. But,
Why
anyway.
don't I'll hang up, and if you could have staff, I'll coordinate
Or
with staff. And
Aaron, try just pushing mute
Yeah,
when you're
just
not
mute your
talking,
phone.
and then
I
and that
actually
way you
have
can
been
stay
on mute the whole. I've been on mute the whole time I'm not talking.
Oh,
so
okay.
Okay.
that's not helping.
Okay.
Any thoughts on this?
Okay.
I'll coordinate
Thanks.
with
Okay, we'll
staff.
Madam Chair,
go ahead, Andrew. Sorry.
this comes back to the board, I believe, in some capacity, because we have not set an expectation. We haven't set a policy that says across the city or in areas or however we're going to do it, this is the expectation for affordability. We haven't approached that yet, and I think in some respect that's on us. And I'm not saying it's all on us, because we have, in this particular issue, we have to deal with this. But I think that we do need to have a discussion and say this is what we expect to help folks go forward in courting private development and so forth.
Madam Chair, and I think I can speak to that, Andrew. Actually, we've had that staff conversation about that conversation is with Melissa as part of our housing plan discussion, and I think what I'm hearing you say, and this is what our intent has been, is to have a conversation about the percentage of mix of affordability depending on where the location is in the city, areas of opportunity versus areas that are not high opportunity. And that conversation is coming. Unfortunately, the timing is just a little off on it for this particular proposal. Madam Chair,
Yes.
if I may ask a question, Melissa and Danny, something that I think is a valid question that comes up in the community is I appreciate the distressed nature of this particular property, but the city owns a lot of property. And so when we're looking at limited funds for housing and we're trying to make a determination of whether we invest in projects or some affordability versus acquire property, how do you go through that determination, in particular around this piece of property? Was there a conversation around that? I mean, I'm concerned that we need to be really aware of. We have set aside a significant amount of money, but it's limited, and we know it's not going to do everything we hope it needs to do. So as we look at a project like this, a proposal like this, how do you balance investing in more property acquisition versus looking at another tool for getting affordability moving?
I think when we prioritize what our actions and our investment is going to be, I mean, you look at a number of priorities, whether it's working with developers to leverage their funds, whether it's a property or a priority such that you feel that the best thing to do is to go in and buy it. And I think when looking at a property like this, as we've indicated in the memo, it really starts addressing a number of goals that are both in the GROW SLC plan and the RDA plan in terms of, providing a mix, revitalizing neighborhood, a key piece of property, catalytic project, addressing a property that has concerns with, crime and code violations. And so for us as an agency, what we look at is trying to figure out where we can get the biggest bang for our buck, where we can, accomplish the most goals. And then we identify whether that's something we feel we could do is finding a partner, leveraging those funds with private investment, or whether that's something we feel that we need to step in and buy the property ourselves and either control that development, or because there are unique situations to that property that we feel need to be addressed by the city. And so the short, easy answer is it's a case-by-case basis, and that's where we lean on what we feel is our goals and plans within a project area, as well as what we feel the market conditions are or what's affecting development within that area. And so in terms of this property, I can let Melissa speak to how the Blue Ribbon Commission came about it, but essentially it's one of those properties where when you look at what you're trying to accomplish, it really starts hitting a lot of those goals. And it's something that when you have the ability to partner with private developers, when you have the ability to partner with someone who's interested in coming in and building it, and what you need is to essentially just bridge that gap between the property now and actually having a willing seller and put the time to put that project together, that is where we came in as the agency of, okay, if we're now talking about trying to address it, and I realize the optics look like we're coming in at the last minute and it's an emergency, but as I said, that was really more of a function of between the negotiations with the property owner as well as the efforts of trying to do this the other way, and the timing just not working between all of those elements. And so the RDA has stepped in to somewhat bridge that time gap, and we recognize that all the details aren't there. We see that, we know that's a concern, but we feel that we have the partnership available to address that, and if we can tie the property up, this property really can address a lot of the concerns that both you as the board and Blue Ribbon Commission, the agency, and the housing department have identified as priorities for doing these projects.
So I appreciate that, Danny. I mean, I really do. I've seen this property. I understand its history. I know it's a challenging piece of property, and there are similar issues on State Street. I guess is if it's even possible to set that aside. I think it's a valid question to say, why not another piece of property the city already owns, instead of acquiring yet another piece of property? And so how do you make that determination and balance? I mean, I imagine there's property the city owns. I think Melissa had a really successful process with the RFP on the Barnes Bank property. And, there are several. I know you've done an inventory of what the city already has in place. How do you make a determination about using this $4 million for this acquisition versus using $4 million to jumpstart the DI property in Sugar House for affordability? I'm only using that as an example of a piece of property
I can speak to that.
of.
That as far as coming on to this position and working with the agency, we have started looking at putting our properties out as a priority and as a focus. And that's not to say that we haven't been doing that, but there are unique challenges with every piece of property that I would be happy to come back and report to where we're at on all those. But we are moving those forward, and we are looking to address the goals and objectives of those properties. And if we can align those properties and that development as well with our own plan, the Grow SLC, that's what we're going to come back and do. So when you look at how spending this money on this property versus spending it on properties we already have, I would say that those properties we feel are already on the track of development and moving forward, and we're going to come back and talk to you about how we're going to use those to address the goals. And for this property, this is very much the challenge, not the challenge, the opportunity of having a developer and someone like Clark Ivy who is willing to step up and do this. And so the role that the RDA can fill in this is one of leveraging our funds to have that private developer and that nonprofit come in and do it. And so that's the opportunity we have here, is taking the RDA funds and turning it into a larger project that we don't necessarily have to have as big of a role because we have an interested party, whereas the other properties we're going to push forward and go out and build those partnerships on those.
Stan, a follow-up to yours. I just have to tell you, Danny, it was disconcerting to me when I met with members of the Blue Ribbon Commission, and they said they had never been provided with a list of city-owned properties to consider. And I'm wondering, had they had those, if they might have made other choices or added to the choices. And I think it's really important that that be shared with them so that we have that. And we're going to take just a tiny break. No one's going to leave, so we can redial Erin and see if we can get her back on the line. So talk among yourselves, but don't leave. More to be continued. information, and we'll have you say your names if you would. But before you do that, Derek had a clarification question.
Danny?
Yes,
Hi.
sorry.
No, it's okay. So, Mike, I have a point of clarification on your most recent point. You've mentioned twice in this conversation so far Clark Ivory, but you know, I read the packet top to bottom, and I don't remember seeing his name mentioned at all. So, can you talk to me a little bit about what you're referring to? And you know, I'm sure this is a great partnership that you're talking about, but I would just like to understand what you're getting at, because you keep mentioning him as like a point of, you know, selling this to us, but I'm not following. So please elaborate.
So, number one, just to be fair, I think Melissa had one of those mentions. So, but no, I think that's an excellent point, and I would bump it to the applicant, and they can explain their relationship with Ivory.
Jim Seberg is here from Ivory Construction, so he can speak specifically to that.
So I'll just briefly introduce myself. So good to meet you, Derek, and other RDA members. We appreciate your service, et cetera, for not only the city and county, but broader state of Utah. I run Ivory Commercial and Multifamily.
Can you say your name again
Sure.
for us? In fact, all three of you.
Jim Seberg,
Okay, thank you.
S-E-A-B-E-R-G. I run Ivory Commercial and Multifamily. I'm not from Utah. I helped start that organization or entity almost 9 years ago. We focus probably 80% of what we do on multifamily. So the idea here is that between what Ivory Homes does, obviously people in this valley know about that, and what we do within Ivory Commercial and Multifamily, we build more housing than anyone else in the state of Utah. I'll do about 700 multifamily units a year. We have 2,500 market rate units up and running, and then we tend to help on the low-income housing side by doing 1 or 2 projects a year with different nonprofit organizations so that our purchasing power can be passed on to them to help in the affordable housing market. Over my history since being here, about 8 to 10% of our units have been low-income housing. So that is our relationship. When we were involved in the Blue Ribbon Commission, Clark is on that commission. When he heard about the issues that they were confronting, several developers were invited to participate. He invited me to attend and asked me to step forward with my entity, ICO, to see if we could be helpful. And so our solution to that was not to offer ourselves to be a developer. I am not interested in developing. I'm only interested in helping pass on our construction savings to those developers, typically not-for-profits, who are involved in low-income housing. So we suggested that to the Blue Ribbon Commission involve some nonprofits who can actually develop, own, and manage where they have expertise. So that's our role. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. So as far as expertise goes, are you talking sharing labor costs or design work, or what are you thinking here?
So we're an integrated developer, builder, and property manager focused on market rate, typically apartments and commercial. What we do with entities like Utah Nonprofit, Western Region Nonprofit, other nonprofits, is we will help on the architecture side. We have proprietary agreements with architects. We've spent more money probably on what we call MEP, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, structural engineering, to help value engineer and design these so that they're the most affordable but long-lasting projects. I've coined the term lowest lifetime total cost of ownership. It's trademarked. That's what we design to. I know cost per decibel reductions in flooring assemblies, et cetera. So the benefits to any of the nonprofit and or municipalities that are supportive of low-income housing are that they get the flow through of our volume purchasing. We don't self-perform, we design and help with that, bringing architects and engineers together to get the optimal design for a particular project. As Marion and Ryan talk about this, we can talk about some ideas of rough densities that we would be considering simply because we bring that kind of expertise along with them. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks for the clarification. I appreciate that.
I have a follow-up question.
Go ahead, Erin.
Is IOC's participation contingent upon Western Regional being the nonprofit entity?
So thanks for asking. It is not. Let me just tell you a bit of context. Right now, I am here simply because I'm devoted to the state of Utah and because that's part of what we do within Ivory and ICO. We've worked with other nonprofits as well. I think we're in a better position than most other developers. That was apparent when we discussed this with the Blue Ribbon Commission, and other developers looked to who would be best suited to do this. We don't have any ownership in these projects. We don't intend to. We simply try to help the community by bringing our volume purchasing and design to any of these projects. The owner of the project would be a nonprofit like what Western Region is doing. We would, totally transparent, earn a very small profit fee. I don't know what you think is appropriate, but typically, just to be very blunt with everyone, we've typically had about a 2% profit fee, so about like a grocery store, for taking on the construction risk. Realize that when you build a high-density project like this, I have all of that vertical risk for a very low margin, but that's what we do. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and I'm sorry I called you the International Olympic Committee and not ICO.
Thanks for the compliment. If only I had that athletic prowess. But,
Yeah, bring it here in 2026. So let me clarify. I didn't see anywhere in our information that the intent is that you will build, own, and operate this facility. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And is there...
So just to clarify, we would be the contractor under an owner-developer's direction, and he would have the ultimate say in design, and then obviously own and operate it after the fact.
Okay. And do you anticipate that this could produce tax increment
Yes.
at some point? And Danny, this question is for you. Nowhere in the paperwork you gave us was this arrangement laid out.
No.
It's all news to us today.
For the purposes of our loan, the applicant is Western Regional. They are the ones who are assuming the upfront risk. And then obviously as part of their partnership for bringing the project to fruition, I mean, those details are still being sorted out, but that's the partnership that they have and that they're working on right now. So.
Okay.
And they have a long-standing partnership. So just to add some
They
comfort.
have a long-standing
yes,
partnership?
they do.
Okay.
So when we met with the group of developers, they knew that they had an existing relationship. Of course, Housing and Neighborhood Development also knows them as an entity that's strong, and we were so we worked within that realm.
Just to be clear on partnership, we act as a contractor. Again, we don't have ownership in a particular project, but we have a working relationship where we deliver on time and on budget for this entity.
Okay. Further questions? For the developers? Okay, go ahead, Derek.
Since we've got you here and you're experienced in developing housing, can you speak to the shortage in the labor market right now, whether we're talking, electricians or plumbers, and how that impacts affordable housing development broadly, but especially affordable housing development?
Can I do that for? Thanks, Marion. So, Derek, great question. And contextually, I want the RDA board to just realize what is occurring in the broader market, not just here in Utah, but across the United States, and we're impacted by that, including what's happened with the hurricanes, et cetera. So from a land standpoint, here in Salt Lake, just in the broader downtown area, prices have escalated over the last 2 years at 40%, and they continue to go up. This appraisal was done in June. If you want to have an ability to purchase more land, you're only going to face increasing prices at radical rates relative to what you've experienced or been used to in the past. From a labor standpoint, across all trades in construction, there are shortages. There were 4 years ago 6 plumbers from the Davis County VOTEC that graduated. What happened is during the last downturn, people went out of the construction labor force and they haven't come back. We don't self-perform, so I don't have trucks, I don't have individual construction laborers. We simply bring them together and take market rates, but our purchasing power enables us to do that. So you're facing a shortage of not only labor. My labor costs this year are up about 12 to 14%. There's no end in sight. Additionally, commodities, the CRB index is up radically. So lumber, concrete, et cetera, is up in the order of magnitude similar to labor rates. and that's forecast to continue over time. What we do is we end up committing people to a project, so we lock in prices over the life of a construction period. So if this were an 18 month to 22 month construction period, we'd lock in prices with the right to reduce them if market rates reduce, but not with the right to have them increased on us. Does that answer your question, Derek? Thank you.
Madam Chair, I have a follow-up question.
Go ahead, James.
ICO, how many multifamily units do you have in Salt Lake City?
So in Salt Lake City, we have 450. Across the Wasatch Front, we have about 2,500 up and running.
500. These 400 units, where are they located?
West Valley and in South Jordan.
Okay, Salt Lake County, but in Salt Lake City proper, you don't.
No,
currently
we
have
own
anything.
we own property on South Temple that is in the process of being approved.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you.
And I have a follow-up for the developers. What is your background in new construction? I know you've done rehabilitation. Have you had experience with new construction?
I'm Ryan Hackett. I'm the development coordinator. This is Marion Willie, the executive director of Utah Nonprofit Housing Corporation and the president of Western Region, which is sister companies, sister nonprofits.
You got to speak right into the mic. Thanks.
Yeah. I'll go again then. Did you get it last?
Say your names again. Yeah.
Okay, Ryan Hackett.
And Marion Willie.
Okay, thanks.
Maybe, I think maybe just show you some history about Utah Nonprofit, and some of you will remember, most of you won't. I look on the back wall here at Florence Bittner. She was one of the first council member that I work with, and I work with actually Stan Penfold. Maybe I won't say that, in the late 80s, so we're both getting...
That may not help you, Marion.
Yeah. May not help me out. But when Utah Nonprofit was formed over 50 years ago, Father Jerry Merrill, which was a priest in the Guadalupe area, he was actually a chemistry professor there, himself and Carl Inouye, which started the ASSIST program, that Roger Borganeff, and they were the founders of both of those organizations. And when I came in 1995, we had a staff of 2, myself and an asset manager. Today we have over 150 people, and we have over about 2,500 units. Most of our units are in Salt Lake City. James Kira Building, Hamilton Place. In fact, in 2002, I was on the Olympic Committee, and after the committee met, there was a couple $1 million left. We came to the city, worked with the council. I don't think any of you were here then, but in 2002, and you gave us $1 million to acquire what we call Lorna Doone, 142 units of affordable housing, and that targets people at 0% to 50% of AMI. And they're the old buildings around town. You've probably seen those. But we have about 1,000 units in Salt Lake City. We've come a long ways from where we started in 95, and then in 2003, I founded another nonprofit called Western Region Nonprofit to do projects out of state, and with a program with HUD, and we acquired another 2,500 units. So we have about 5,000 units with both nonprofits. And we had just completed a new construction project in South Salt Lake with ICO a week and a half ago, or a little over a week ago. We had an open house there. We had 58 units, and we had 44 applications in the first few days. So we'll have that particular senior housing filled up. So we have done new construction, South Jordan. We've done a lot of renovation, and it's not funny when I say this, because I can understand what Stan was saying on State Street. I won't mention any names, but as the largest nonprofit in the state of Utah, we were asked to go in and help other nonprofits that went under. I don't want to say under. Anyway, they had some difficult in southern Utah. We took in Color Country, which is a couple hundred units, Ryan, and then we also they worked on multi-ethnic development, which a group of people worked 5 years on that particular organization to try to get it worked out. Well, finally they came to us. We were able to take those properties. We worked with other nonprofits to do that. And my final thing, which was the worst decision I ever made in my life, and always I say to Stan, is you did a State Street project with somebody. I did another project with somebody with the same person in Price, Utah, where I thought was spending $3 million. I spent $5 million. but I did have a great contract and a good bank, so we were reimbursed all of our money, and we got that worked out. And then we, because of the two developers, the developer, Key Bank and the Richmond Group, the investors asked Utah Nonprofit and Western Region to take over 360 units of this particular person's assets. So we're now, and most of these projects, a lot of them are located in Salt Lake City, old buildings that need a lot of work, and we're taking on that problem, I say, because it has been a problem, to preserve affordable housing. And I think what we're trying to do here today is to do housing, and yeah, we're getting maybe the cart before the horse. But as we have done land banking also for future projects, and one actually in Salt Lake City that we haven't discussed with anybody. But we've done this because of we know what's happening, and we get calls every day. Where we purchased property at $30,000 a unit years ago, we have somebody wanting to pay us $130,000 a unit. We say we're a nonprofit, we don't sell anything, and the great thing about whatever we do here, it will always be affordable. There'll be some market rate units. In fact, our South Salt Lake property had market rate units in it also.
Thank you for giving us the historical background. So I did hear in there, yes, you've done new construction.
Yes.
That was my question.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry.
Yes, we average at least 1 to 2 new construction every year.
Okay, great. And Derek, you had a question.
Yeah, I'd just first like to say that I think, a partnership with a private developer in the private sector and a nonprofit developer, I think your arguments are really great and spot on, and we want to work with Ivory and all other developers to pool our resources and beef up our buying power. I think that's exactly what we need to be doing, and so I appreciate that level of collaboration that has come out of the Blue Ribbon Commission. I think this is exceptional. Obviously, there's some concerns with this project in particular and the way that it's come about, but I think we can work through that. My question to you, Marion, is why? It seems like the Utah Nonprofit Housing Corporation has a rich history here in Salt Lake. Why is it that the Western Regional is the applicant?
Well, actually, it would be a joint application because of both nonprofits. So it would be a joint with Utah Nonprofit and Western Region, just because of, frankly, assets. Western Region and Utah Nonprofit, we depend on no donations for administrative costs, so we use both our developer fees and our management fees to maintain the nonprofits. And the reason Western Region was set up was to do a lot of out-state projects, but this would be a joint effort with Utah Nonprofit and Western Region.
So Danny, why wasn't that included in our information?
I believe it was indicated that Western Regional is a sister company to Utah Nonprofit.
Okay, I didn't catch that in the documentation. Aaron, do you have any other questions?
Yeah, with regard to the approximate 1 new product per year comment that the applicant just mentioned, how many of those have been along a TSA, within a TSA?
New construction, how many have been in a TSA?
Each year, because we're affordable housing developers, the Utah Housing Corporation in the past has tried to aggregate most of the units around TOD situations. So that's where we've been focusing.
For Western, though, specifically.
For Western Region?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Oh, they have not built next to a TOD. It's been through Utah Nonprofit, which is...
And why isn't Utah Nonprofit Housing Corporation the applicant then?
They could be. We're sister companies. We have some of the same board members, so we work together on projects, just like we worked on Sharon Gardens, which was a TOD site.
Through Utah Nonprofit, though.
And Western Region. Western Region was the developer. They developed the property. Utah Nonprofit will manage the property. So that's how the team works. We have the development part of it, and they have the management part of it.
And where's that project?
In South Salt Lake, 3351 Sioux Street.
Thank you.
Thanks. Charlie?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for your comments as well. my tone's going to probably be a little bit different because I'm actually very, very excited about where we are at this point in our affordable housing discussion. I think as a council, this has been a priority that we've had for a couple of years. To Aaron's point, our board member Mendenhall's point, we've set aside more money than I think any other municipality or RDA board has in the Western U.S. at least, possibly the U.S. overall. So I mean, this is definitely demonstrates our collective commitment as a city to the importance of affordable housing. When we've looked at the citywide housing, the draft citywide housing plan that we've been sent, we've as a council have held a public hearing, we've held 4 briefings. We've been moving this process forward, and trying to be as transparent and open as we possibly can. I think that is something that's really important. The point that board member Mendenhall made, or our board member Penfold made earlier about the project on State Street, I think is very, very important to bring up for a couple of reasons. Not only because of some of the problems that we've seen, and in no way am I trying to say that that's something that I would anticipate happening with you and or this project, but as a board member who has sat through numerous briefings where we've had to extend loans, where we've had to do a lot of stuff. The hope, the intent for me as a board member on that project was that we would have a project in place that would be housing people now. That did not happen, and we spent a lot of time, waiting for others to get their ducks in a row, and it never happened. And unfortunately, we ended up being in a position. Well, fortunately, unfortunately, I think it's fortunately that the city purchased the property on that site so that we can actually start moving something forward. But to me, it really brought something up that I think we as a board need to be aware of. And when we have set aside as much money as we have to do something as not only, I say noble, but I think as progressive as this is, when we start talking about affordable housing and the need for affordable housing in the city and housing development, we need to be very, very careful, and we need to be very judicious about how we appropriate that money. When I look at where we are and the proposal, there are a couple of things that give me pause. Most of it has to do around the fact that we still don't have a lot of detail, and I know that, and I appreciate your your comments and explanation about how we can move forward with that in the process, and I'm sure that the board or that the RDA staff would keep the board apprised. But to Jennifer Bruno's point, this is once we make this decision, I mean we're really out of that, and I feel that there's still a lot of information that we need to get before I would be comfortable moving in the direction that's been proposed. There's also the issue of the surrounding neighborhoods, and I appreciate the outreach that's been done with some of the community councils. But when I look at some of the concepts that have been proposed for this project and compare it, say, to the Barnes Bank project, they're vastly different. We're still dealing with with housing projects, but when we look at the lack of mixed use on the North Temple site, that's something that concerns me. As a board member, we've talked about catalytic projects. We've talked about the need to do something that is really going to kickstart that neighborhood, something that the neighborhood will appreciate, not just for the property owners on North Temple, but in the surrounding neighborhoods as well. They've been very clear that the concern and the perception is that the city moves forward, and we put a lot of the affordable housing on the west side, that we don't do things that are comparable citywide. And unfortunately, when I look at this project and what's been proposed, that only adds fuel to that argument, because there isn't any mixed use. We don't have anything that really is exciting, and I think that we can do better, and I think that the developer can do better. The fact that we don't have a lot of information leads me to believe that that there is some flexibility and that we can move forward with some of those discussions. But what I would like to do at this point is I wouldn't even say we're moving in a different direction, but I think we're moving in a parallel direction to what's been done. I would hate to see us make a decision that ends up where we're in the position that we were with State Street, where in 4 years we end up not having anything in place. We haven't done anything to add to our affordable housing stock in the city, and we just delay ourselves. And so one way that I think we can avoid that is by maintaining a little bit more control over the process. So, Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion at this point, if that's appropriate.
Yes, go ahead.
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve $4 million from the $21 million affordable housing set-aside for the RDA to purchase the overnight or motel property, contingent upon the Salt Lake City Housing Authority assigning the purchase contract to the RDA. And if I can speak to that motion.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Okay, there's a motion by Board Member Luke, second by Board Member Penfold. Discussion.
Thank you. So, the reason that I'm making this motion is because I do think that if the RDA is in control of this, we're in an RDA area. The North Temple is in an RDA site. Normally, I would look at this and say, what, I think we need to be maximizing existing city properties or city-owned properties before we start purchasing other properties. But because of the work that Board Member Mendenhall, Board Member Rogers, Board Member Johnston, and I have done working on the motel issue and some of the problems associated with that, I'm very supportive of purchasing this property so that we can move forward with that goal. But I do think that as an RDA, it's important that we have a project that does begin to contribute to some of the tax increment in the future. And I think you can do that with a mixed-use project. Again, I bring up the Barnes Bank site. We've learned, we have to learn from some of the mistakes that we've made. I own, the fact that, I was on the board during the State Street thing. I don't want to make the same mistake. I was, when I look at another housing development on 4th South that is not a mixed-use development, that is problematic. I see that now. And I think that, learning from those errors and making sure that we don't make those same mistakes will not only ensure that we have a much more stable project, but a project that is catalytic, that does help the North Temple corridor, that does contribute to the RDA that we have currently set up on North Temple, that does take into consideration the concerns of the property owners in that area, and the homeowners and the residents who live along North Temple. I think and frankly, I believe that by going this route, we can ensure that we can have a much quicker process and have something moving forward where we're not relying solely on waiting for all the ducks to line up before we can move forward with the shovel-ready project.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Derek.
Just to clarify, so the motion that you made would be for the Redevelopment Agency of Salt Lake City to acquire this property and then move forward with an open bid process?
Yeah, and I think, I know that Board Member Penfold is interested in talking a little bit more in depth about that. But yes, I think that when we look at some of the successful projects that we have done through the RDA, it is through an open bid process. I would hope that the current applicant developer would apply for that. I think that there are opportunities to do so. Again, this is not a slight at the developer. It's just it's looking at the historic issues that we have had on the board in trying to deal with some of these issues, learning from those mistakes and moving forward in a way taking those things into consideration and figuring out how to resolve that.
Can you answer my question?
It is my intent with my second that if this motion is successful, I would have a recommendation for a process for the RDA to move forward with a request for proposals quickly.
So can we add a timeline to this?
Yeah, it's included in mine.
In board member Penfold's.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Andrew?
Follow-up follow-up motion.
Stan, do you have more? And Andrew, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have the property owner here, correct? Of the overnighter?
We have Dan Ackerman from the City Housing Authority, who currently has it under contract, is here.
Okay, so it currently is under contract
Yes.
because it's not our property. I mean, we can say go buy it, but
Right.
that's my question for the board. Not the board. The staff is, what does this change for you all other than the obvious stuff? I mean,
well, first and foremost, the contract expires on November 3rd, so it would be a quick purchase, but you have the recent history of doing that. The second highest concern I would have is then we would become the proud owners and managers and operators of a hotel and everything that goes along with that. That is something we have done before with the RDA, but that is a liability. That is something we would have to take on. The motel does have residents in it right now that for all intents and purposes that is their housing, and so you would take on the obligation and responsibility for relocation, and then from there your thoughts would be exactly what you're saying. Turn around and market it as fast as possible and put out the terms of that such that we could start that process and get bids and try to turn it around as fast as possible.
Great. Madam Chair, as the maker of the motion, I fully agree that that by moving forward with this, and should the housing authority be okay making that purchase, that I do acknowledge that we would be the operator of this motel. I would hope that it is a short-term deal, because I think with board member Penfold's comments, that's certainly the intent of this. But up until things are moving forward, I fully understand that that is something that we would take on.
Madam Chair.
James?
Yeah, but there are people that can do that. We can contract with somebody to take that over.
Yeah.
Speaking as a member of the Blue Ribbon Commission, I just want to say that we wouldn't be here had it not been, put together, and had the individuals that are on that board, the depth and knowledge through, nonprofit and for-profit, and the finance individuals that are there with, all the housing people that are here. And, it's a really great group of individuals. The knowledge is unbelievable with city staff and everyone else that's included. And here we are, we're actually have something that we're ready to move forward with. Granted, it's in an RDA area for me, and it's a blighted piece of property. And I really think that to make that project key is that it needs to go through RFP process. We did it through Barnes Bank. We did it through the old public safety building. I mean, to really get the project for economic development, for the blighted area, to create the affordable housing component and make it a project that actually works in Salt Lake City in a transit-oriented development area, we need to go to RFP. So I would fully support this. And this is, kudos to the Blue Ribbon Commission. They were tasked with something. They were tasked with finding affordable housing, and they've gone for it. And I think that in the future we can help them steer that a little bit more by giving them some policy direction on what we're looking at.
Board Member Penfold?
Madam Chair, I'll support this motion. I think there are a couple of really intriguing things about it. I referenced earlier the idea of a catalytic project, and I think this really could be an opportunity for that in this RDA district. I think it is probably the first opportunity to jump the freeway with some of the really interesting development that's been happening on the east side of the freeway and move it over to the west side of the freeway. And I really think this is the location that could kickstart a lot of that similar kind of investment along North Temple. So I actually think it's a really exciting project. I would fully expect, I have a follow-up motion about an RFP process, but I would fully expect and hope that the current partners are interested and participate in that process. And I think it gives a little more time to sort of flesh out some of these details that we've been concerned about. But primarily, I think it protects the city's interest in investing in a piece of property that I think is critical to the development of North Temple.
So is this a friendly amendment or a second motion?
I'll have a follow-up motion. I think it's a little different than this particular.
Okay, then I will roll call this motion, and let me see if I've got it in a nutshell. That.
Do you want me to restate the motion, Madam Chair?
Restate it, please.
I move that the board approve $4 million from the $21 million affordable housing set aside for the RDA to purchase the overnight or motel property, contingent upon the Salt Lake City Housing Authority assigning the purchase contract to the RDA.
Okay, Aaron, let's start with you.
Yes.
Andrew?
Yes.
Charlie?
Yes.
James?
Yes.
Derek?
Yes.
Stan?
I'm a yes.
And I'm a yes. That is unanimous.
Madam Chair, I have a follow-up motion.
Yes.
I move that the RDA board direct the RDA staff in the process of issuing a request for proposals with the intention of receiving responses by the end of the calendar year, that the RFP would indicate no greater than 60% of total units as affordable, and that other policy goals identified in the transit area zoning specific to this property are referenced and evaluated in the RFP as important to the scoring.
Second.
There's a motion by Board Member Penfold, a second by Board Member Luke. Any discussion?
I do. Wondering if you do a friendly amendment to that, no more than a majority, so it would be 50% until we actually come to a discussion and iron out the AMI of those units.
No more than 50 instead of 60? I would be accepted. I would accept that as a friendly amendment.
Okay.
And Charlie, we second that?
I also accept it as a friendly second. I do want to say though that related to that, I'm still very much in support of that 60% number, but my support for that 60% number is spread across all projects that are going to be tapping into this $21 million, regardless of where it is. If there is a developer who is going to be looking at accessing that affordable housing money, then I think all of those projects have to be at a minimum of 60% affordable. Again, talking, as I mentioned in my earlier comments, we can't just, have one section or one part of the city dealing with the affordability piece. And I feel that when the city is putting dollars on the table, when we do have skin in the game, as we do with this, that it is fully appropriate and acceptable to have that 60% number. But I do think it is important that it be consistent across the board.
Andrew?
Can I speak to that?
Yes, go ahead, Aaron, and then Andrew.
Sorry, it's hard to butt in when you're on the phone.
No problem.
Charlie, I think that there is we do need to have a discussion about that. I think that there is a lot to the 21 million that will be proposed that could be contemplated by the council and the RDA board that is for projects that already exist, perhaps, about in terms of creating affordability or continuing affordability. And it would be, I just don't want to cut us off at the knees before we really get into the more granular discussion about how the 21 million is going to be used. You know what I mean by that?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Board Member Mendenhall. And again, my comments are not part of the motion. It's simply an explanation of my support for that friendly amendment, lowering it to 50% plus one, or the majority of the project. My comments were simply stating that I believe that for new construction where we do have developers accessing that money. That it was my personal view and opinion that we have some consistency. So I will repeat that when we have the broader discussion. But I just wanted to be clear about where I'm coming from.
I want to have you clarify. So when you were talking about 60% AMI or 60% of the project be affordable?
It was 60% of the project, and I think that it's important to have a mix of everything from 60% AMI under and then lower. I think some of the things that we've done in Sugar House with 80% AMI is still really not affordable in some of these areas, and so I want to look at the 60%. But I think instead of just leaving it open, my feeling is that you need to have a mix of affordability as long as it's under that 60% threshold.
Okay. For another day, we'll continue.
Thank you.
Board Member Johnston?
I want to reiterate what Councilmember Luke said. It gets confusing when we talk about 60%, right? I'm very, very adamant that we have a policy discussion about this across the city. We continually are painting certain members of the West Side as NIMBY, as against affordability, when it's clear that we've had new developments come on that have a very different ratio of affordability to market rate in different parts of the city. And we look at the Capitol Motel coming up and Sugarmont, just for two in this discussion, as well as others going forward, the percentage of units need to be compatible across the city that are affordable. And we can talk about AMI and what that means and thresholds that way, but I think we need to be very, very clear and proactive in saying that now and keep saying that forward. Because if we're not, unintentionally, we keep running into the same problem across the city where we continue to have a much higher proportion in developments coming west of I-15 than we will in other parts of the city. So for this motion, I agree with the starting point of 50% if that's where we're going to go. But I want to be clear that before we talk about any of the other developments, we will have to set a policy and be very clear about it.
Madam Chair.
Okay. Yes, Stan.
And I was receptive to that as a friendly amendment with that understanding, because I do think we will quickly have a conversation, and Melissa, I'll sort of direct this to you because it'll be in front of you as part of the housing plan around what type of percentage we want to recommend as a policy, depending probably around areas of opportunity. And I think those will be different across the city, those areas of opportunity and those percentages. So that's the conversation we expect to have, and then, before the end of November. So.
Any further comments?
Madam Chair, if I may, it's not necessarily a comment to the motion, but I acknowledge with Danny and the RDA that we will have some expenses associated to this, and that I expect them to come back to us quickly with
Where I was going. Right?
Yeah, I know where he's going with that. So I want to suggest that my support of this motion indicates to the RDA staff that I'm supportive, understanding and supportive of those costs associated with that, in particular relocation, which is going to be really challenging no matter who is relocating people. And that's something we probably need to have as part of our consideration for our housing plan, Melissa, going forward, is that there are probably future opportunities where we will have relocation costs associated with that. And I certainly want to be very aware that we are probably relocating the very people we're hoping to house. So that's something we need to be extremely aware of going forward. So, Danny, our next RDA meeting is the 14th, I believe.
Of November.
So I would hope that we can have some preliminary estimates for cost, or maybe some recommendations for how we might allocate that cost at our next meeting. I know that's fast, but even if we were looking at some really preliminary numbers, I'd be supportive of discussing that then.
As long as you're.
Can I?
Sorry, go ahead, please.
Go
To
ahead,
tag
Ann.
on to that, Board Member Penfold, I'm glad you brought that up. And if the RDA staff or HAND staff has recommendations on ways to mitigate the displacement during construction and this period where the motel may not be operational, I would love those to come back to the board. But initially, I think it would be really important for us to actually get some demographic information about the people who are using the overnighter as housing in sort of a long-term fashion. I think we want to know more about who it is we're trying not to displace.
Okay.
Does anyone have an idea about a way to go about collecting some information from that demographic?
Dan Nackerman has already done some preliminary reaching out, as we recognize that would be an issue. And so to date, he thinks there's about 8 to 10 folks that are using it on a long-term basis. But certainly, I'm sure under the new ownership structure, that will be a top priority for them to figure out. So I'm sure you'll hear more of that. But we do know so far that it is a very small percentage that are using it on a month-to-month.
Thank you. And I would echo Board Member Luke's comments. I would hope that you will be interested in participating in the RFP because we really appreciate your willingness to come up and go to bat and show an interest. I am very appreciative of Ivory being willing to be involved and the Blue Ribbon Commission being involved in this. So with that, we'll take a vote. Erin. She's still there?
Sorry, I had to unmute you. Yes.
Okay. Andrew?
Yes.
Charlie?
Yes.
James? Stan? Yes. And I'm a yes, and Board Member Kitchen has had to leave, so he is not voting. That is unanimous, and it passes. And just to continue our meeting, any report from the Executive Director? Nothing from me? Anything from the staff? Danny?
Just
More?
to follow up on,
Okay.
on the motion that just took place, we will do our best to get information, but understand that in order to get something in the packet for November 14th, that has to be done by tomorrow. So
I appreciate that.
So
I do appreciate that timeline, Danny.
No, it doesn't.
yes, it does, because we have 2 weeks prior to the meeting and 3 days before that to get it to the administration.
It's for the mayor's office,
Oh,
for them to get it through the
office. I was
mayor
gonna say,
so
for
that
us,
they can
it's
get
2
it to
weeks
us.
in
Yeah.
advance. Okay.
So,
So,
and I know that I know that's a crunch. I get, and I appreciate that. So I'm not expecting you to stay up all night.
No.
But I think any information you can provide, even if we have enough to provide a placeholder for that discussion, and then additional information as we, and really I'm looking for that preliminary information around those costs associated with,
That's exactly where I was going.
Right.
If we can put a
Yeah.
placeholder
Yeah.
and understand that what we provide in the next day may not ultimately be what we can provide at the meeting, and give us that opportunity to get that information.
Right.
This was not
Great.
anticipated in our workload right now, and so we will do
appreciate
that,
that.
and we'll put something together.
Thank you.
So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and we stand adjourned. Thank you.